Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Monday, June 5th, 2017. Before we dive into our news and comment today, a quick programming note. Your humble host has been called for jury duty starting tomorrow. But at the end of the day, I call in to make sure they still really need me and want me. And in the past, it's happened 3 times. Only once have I actually had to report. And then they settled the case before we actually were selected for jury duty. So I don't know what the outcome will be, but be prepared for no podcast tomorrow or business as usual, depending on what the court decides about my fate. And there's court action in Salt Lake City that I lead with today. As you may know, I believe the biggest threats don't come from Russia or Trump or Neanderthal Republicans, but to the bipartisan sellout of our constitutional rights. And the Fourth Amendment is first and foremost, to me, a very important one that has been eroded badly since 9/11. And 2 of my personal heroes, 2 people who have participated in podcast interviews with me on multiple occasions over the years, are involved in this case in Salt Lake City. Thomas Drake, the former NSA executive who turned whistleblower, has filed a declaration in a case that was brought by Rocky Anderson. Anderson's the former mayor of Salt Lake City, and he earned my vote when he ran for president in 2012 as the leader of the Justice Party. And after he learned that his hometown of Salt Lake, which hosted the Olympics back in 2002, was subjected to extraordinary blanket or dragnet surveillance by the NSA, Rocky Anderson filed suit and got this important declaration from Tom Drake. I'm linking to the Washington Post report from Friday, I believe, and also that includes a link embedded to the 9-page declaration, which is a sworn statement from Tom Drake. And what he tells us is that following the 9/11 events, which were just a few months before the U.S. hosting of the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, the FBI and NSA said, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to test our surveillance toys. And what Tom Drake asserts is that they scooped up and stored the content of emails and text messages sent and received by anyone in the entire city or at the Olympic venues, including American citizens. They did so without a warrant, without probable cause, in direct violation of our Fourth Amendment guarantees. Now, this is being denied by people at the currently and former at the NSA. Michael Hayden, the former NSA director, has issued a statement which is carefully worded that said that he didn't direct it. And the current operations manager at NSA, Wayne Murphy, has issued this denial. The NSA has never at any time conducted mass or blanket surveillance, interception, or analysis of email, text message, telephone, or other telecommunications in Salt Lake City or the vicinity of the Olympic Games venues, whether during 2002 or otherwise. Now, that sounds like a pretty broad and blistering denunciation. But I don't believe the spooks. They're paid to lie. And Tom Drake explicitly takes on these comments and says that they are literally false and substantially misleading. And he relates how back in 2002, when he was at NSA, he started hearing rumors from alarmed colleagues about the Salt Lake City Olympics field op. Then he started seeing the documents showing shipments of surveillance equipment to Utah. And what we've learned is that Quest, a Denver-based telecommunications company that I used to own a few shares of stock in, was headed by a guy named Joe Nocchio. Joe Nocchio went to prison nominally for insider trading, but we believe that he was the only telephone company executive who objected to the NSA's grab of all of our telephone metadata records. And that probably would have occurred after the events of 2002. And when Joe Nocchio got out of prison, I asked him for an interview, and he declined. I would love to talk to him still, and if you know Joe Nocchio, please put me in touch with him. So this is a fascinating story. It is one that deserves great attention. But, gee, Trump tweets and the news media gets so distracted that important stories like this that I can't emphasize enough really affect directly our contract with our government, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it takes bipartisan buy-in or sellout to keep something like this going. A couple of quotes from Tom Drake's declaration. The Salt Lake Olympics field op included geofencing to set up virtual boundaries around Salt Lake City and nearby Olympic venues for a time period before and during the Winter Olympic Games. Virtually all electronic communication signals that went into or out of those designated areas were captured and stored by NSA, including the contents of emails and text messages. The NSA stored the metadata for all those signals, too. The text-based content of those signals, like the text in emails or text messages, were all captured and stored. Some other content, like large images or video files, were not necessarily stored because they were so large. But he goes on to declare that Wayne Murphy's statements are simply not true, and that this was an illegal bulk telephony metadata program, a program subject to private electronic communications of people in the United States, subjecting them to mass, indiscriminate, warrantless surveillance. And so this is a very important case. I am proud to know Rocky Anderson, and as soon as my schedule permits, I'll try to line up an interview with Anderson and with Drake to bring you more information on this important case. I don't have a lot of detail, but I've learned that today the Supreme Court has agreed to decide whether the government needs a warrant to obtain information from cell phone companies showing their customers' locations. Now, location data is not necessarily part of the metadata of who called from A to B, how long that call took place, what numbers were involved. But again, based on the sketchy report so far, the court took the case Carpenter versus the U.S., and it concerns historical data held by cell phone companies that shows users' movements over time and could, for instance, place them at the scene of a crime. Now, this is just one of the mission creep aspects of what we're told was all designed to prevent terrorist attacks by foreigners in the United States. And it violates the mission statement of the NSA only to conduct surveillance outside the United States. And this is a very critical set of issues. We'll be looking to see if the scope includes the Stingray systems of surveillance that grab all of the communications on cell phones in a radius of the Stingray device. And we will see if the court still is concerned about the use of GPS devices to track the movements of individuals without a warrant. So I'm glad to see the court is taking the case, but we will see how it all plays out. As you know, Saturday night in London was a grisly attack. First, a van mowed down people on London Bridge, and then at least 3 people in that van drove a short distance to a food court area where they started knifing people. And those knife attacks claimed at least 7 lives. The combination of the knife incidents and the vehicle attack on the London Bridge. And I'll leave it to the corporate media to cover this in greater detail. We do have information about the alleged suspects. One is identified as Rashid Redouane, age 30, who claimed to be Moroccan and Libyan. It's not, they say that he was not known to police and intelligence in Britain before the attack. The other is identified as Khurram Shahzad Butt, age 27. He had been investigated in 2015. He is known to be a British citizen. So despite all that, Trump went really bonkers, and he started tweeting immediately before anybody knew whether this was actually a terrorist incident or not. And it's just like he did last Wednesday or Thursday when there was an attack on a casino in the Philippines, in Manila, and Trump just assumed that it was terrorism and didn't bother to check, and I don't believe he has corrected his errant remarks about that. But on Saturday, not based on intelligence provided by the government or even by the British, but based on an item from the Drudge Report, Trump started tweeting critical comments about the British, and he misquoted the mayor of London, who happens to be a Muslim, and began to attack him. And this is just so... it is cringeworthy, because as Americans, we are deeply embarrassed by these antics of an immature, irrational guy who is so trigger-happy with his Twitter phone, that he makes these kinds of outrageous commentary that then has to be walked back. And Theresa May, who is nominally supported by Trump, and she tries to weave a fine line, avoid attacking him and avoid becoming one of his targets, but she is up for election on Thursday. And it appears that the polling was fairly tight, but this incident over the weekend may harm the electoral prospects of Theresa May and allow the Labor Party's Jeremy Corbyn to score an upset. Now, what we're seeing is criticism of May because before she was promoted to prime minister without an election, when David Cameron resigned last year, she was the Home Secretary, and as such, she presided over reduction in force, a substantial reduction of police officers on the streets of London and Britain in general. And Jeremy Corbyn is tilting to the right, claiming that he supports a call for her resignation because of the reduction in police officers. He's also shifted position opportunistically. He now supports shooting to kill terrorism suspects, where in the past he said that they should be shot to immobilize them. And Corbyn also accused the government of failing to publish a report from 2016 on foreign financing of extremist groups for fear of upsetting foreign governments. And, of course, that would lead to Saudi Arabia in particular. Trump's alarmist and irrational tweeting was not the only kind of very strange instant reaction. A host named Reza Aslan on CNN referred to Trump as a man-baby and a piece of excrement. I guess he used the term shit. A Breitbart News writer argued on Twitter there'd be no deadly attacks in the UK if Muslims didn't live there. A conversation on Fox and Friends led to a discussion of internment of all Muslims in the United Kingdom. So these kinds of extreme and irrational reactions, particularly during the live coverage when they have very little to go on and they remain live, playing the same footage over and over again, speculating in a terribly irresponsible way in so many cases. So the mayor of London urged people to recognize that there would be a stronger police presence, very visible, and that they shouldn't be alarmed by that. And Trump seized that out of context and just said, wow, he says people shouldn't be alarmed. Well, it's a leader's job to try to calm people after an incident like this. And instead, Trump is stoking fear. He is an alarmist of the lowest order. And he really is trying to manipulate this for domestic political purposes, because while we believe that one of the three suspects is Irish, another claims to be Moroccan Libyan, there is no clear indication that if Britain had a travel ban like the one Trump has tried to decree, that this event would have been prevented. And so he is just so irrational and is, determined to use anything, no matter how far-fetched, to promote his really draconian ideas. Now, he is shooting himself in the foot repeatedly whenever he tweets, because today He rebelled against his own advisors who watered down his original executive order barring visitors from select Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. And they retooled to avoid the term travel ban because that had drawn the ire of judges after it was initially released in late January. And now Trump, who says, one of his tweets, "People, the lawyers and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I am calling it what we need and what it is, a travel ban." So even if he thinks, and I certainly don't agree with him, that banning certain people from entering the United States or subjecting them to these extreme vetting procedures is actually going to prevent a domestic terrorism incident, it's total bullshit. But Trump, again, digging deeper in the hole he's already surrounded himself in, the Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to the SC for Supreme Court. He added, in a second tweet, the Justice Department should ask for an expedited hearing of the watered-down travel ban before the Supreme Court and seek a much tougher version. Now, the court has agreed to review the appeals court rejection of most elements of the so-called travel ban, if that's what you want to call it. And get this, Mr. Kellyanne Conway, George Conway III, who just withdrew from an appointment by Trump to be an assistant attorney general for the civil division, he actually tweeted criticism of Trump. These tweets may make some people feel better, but certainly won't help the office of OSG. I'm not sure that's Solicitor General. That's what it is. It won't help the Solicitor General get 5 votes in the Supreme Court, which is what actually matters. And he ended with sad, period. So this is becoming a sideshow, a cartoonish mess. And just with a little of injection of reality, Peter Bergen, who's an establishment guy, he's written a book, he's on CNN. I heard him during some of the live coverage on Saturday. He's at the New America Foundation, and he wrote a piece that's in the Washington Post today. Trump's travel ban is useless. Terrorists mostly come from our own backyard. I've linked to it, and you can read as he lays out his rationale that this is irrational and that we really should try to cut off this guy's Twitter account before he can do more damage. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like John Zweibel, Paul L. Sesser, Steve Wazinski, and Linda Gray. I appreciate your support. That's my soft pedal way of saying you could be a subscriber too. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and you've got options. I hope you'll choose one. So we've seen this on the streets of Berkeley. A group of Trump supporters decide to provoke the rest of the community by staging a protest. Now, they are entitled to do so. They have the same First Amendment rights as everyone else. But inevitably now, they draw more counter-protesters than protesters, and those counter-protesters are all peaceful. But then the small number of hooligans who call themselves anti-fascist or Antifa show up in hoods and start to throw rocks and bottles at the police, and this led to a skirmish in Portland. 14 people were arrested, and really no one is served by this except perhaps the predatory media that gets footage that it can then use repeatedly when the next incident occurs. And I'm getting a little tired of this cycle, and I think we have to find a way to get the Antifa to stay home and play video games. Meanwhile, there was a protest in Washington by people who believe the narrative advanced by MSDNC and Democratic leaders that Russia hacked the election and tilted the election toward Trump. The March for Truth was described by the New York Times as drawing several dozen demonstrators in Washington. Now, I don't use that number to try to put this down because the corporate media has a sorry record of grossly underestimating protests by people that they don't typically agree with. But this is this is consistent with the narrative that's been offered by the New York Times and the Washington Post since last summer. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't give it a little more juice and a little more coverage. Now, drawing on that event, I want to direct your attention to a powerful op-ed published today by my friend Norman Solomon, and it's entitled "Dangerous Discourse When Progressives Sound Like Demagogues." And he opens with a description of one of the speakers at the Truth Rally in Washington on Sunday, Democrat Jamie Raskin, who has just been elected to the House of Representatives, read from a prepared text. He said Donald Trump is the hoax perpetrated on the Americans by the Russians. Soon he named such varied countries as Hungary, the Philippines, Syria, and Venezuela, and immediately proclaimed, "All the despots, dictators, and kleptocrats have found each other, and Vladimir Putin is the ringleader of the unfree world." And Solomon notes that Raskin floundered during a filmed interview when asked about the factual errors in his speech, and then he segues to the recent article by former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who wrote a piece titled "The Art of the Trump-Putin Deal." And Solomon says the time-worn technique was, in effect, "I can't prove it's true, but let's proceed as though it is." And Solomon goes on to say that it's sad to see so much eagerness to trust in the absolute credibility of institutions like the CIA and NSA, institutions that previously earned wise distrust. He says the over-the-top scapegoating of Russia serves many purposes for the military-industrial complex, Republican neocons, and kindred liberal interventionist Democrats. Along the way, the blame Russia first rhetoric is of enormous help to the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, a huge diversion lest its elitism and entwinement with corporate power come under greater scrutiny and stronger challenge from the grassroots. One more quote from Solomon. The inducements and encouragements to buy into an extreme anti-Russia frenzy have become pervasive. A remarkable number of people claim certainty about hacking and even collusion, events that they cannot at this time truly be certain about. In part, that's because of deceptive claims endlessly repeated by Democratic politicians and news media, including the misleading claim that 17 U.S. intelligence agencies reached the same conclusion. And I want to note that in her overhyped interview with Vladimir Putin on her debut on her new Sunday night TV show on NBC, Megyn Kelly, who, by the way, was competing with the NBA playoffs and 60 Minutes, took what was a very brief interview with Vladimir Putin and stretched it into almost a whole hour of teases. And as she opened one part of it, she repeated the falsehood that 17 intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia manipulated our election. She also later referred to the dossier that came from a former British intelligence agent, opposition research on Trump. She referred to that as a Russian dossier. And you could see Putin shake his head and just kind of, feel that she's an idiot. As he was asked that question. And when asked if he had any compromising material about Donald Trump, he said, well, this is just another load of nonsense. And he went on to say that, do you think we're gathering compromising information on all American executives who travel to Russia? He said there are about 100 of them probably in the country right now. Have you all lost your senses? Now, I will say that Putin got the better of Megyn Kelly with his blustering denials. He may be lying. After all, he is a former spook who was trained to lie, and I do not particularly, offer him a great deal of credibility. But what if he's telling the truth? When asked about those 17 intelligence agencies, he said they have been misled, and they aren't analyzing the information in its entirety. I haven't seen even once any direct proof of Russian interference in the presidential election. And as you know, that is my position as well. There may be evidence, but nobody has shared it with us. It's all on a trust-me basis. And it takes a lot of chutzpah and a fair amount of risk for Putin to do this interview and tell big whoppers of lies. Now, again, he may just be opportunistically here dealing with this. And last week he did shift his position to suggest, maybe some patriotic Russians may have hacked. But I think he's just toying with the Americans because of the evidence-free narrative that so many people have swallowed. And here's a counterpoint. One of the people who is as skeptical as I am published a quote from an appearance by Andrea Mitchell on MSDNC last week, where she summarized Hillary Clinton's charges of all the reasons why she lost the election. And she said she is drawing a conspiracy theory. She doesn't have the evidence to prove this. That's what Robert Mueller and what the congressional committees are supposed to be doing. That's an interesting crack in the the viewpoints of those who've been promoting the Trump-Russia narrative. Also, my friend Gareth Porter published a piece at Consortium News over the weekend about the allegation, still unproven, that Jared Kushner tried to set up a secret back channel to the Russians in a meeting with Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador. We still don't have any evidence of their conversation. It does appear that they had a meeting and that Kushner did not report it in his security application. But what Gareth Porter points out is that one of the great heroes of the grand old party, Henry Kissinger, set up a back channel to Russia in 1968, before Nixon won the election and took the White House. And that Henry Kissinger knew that the guy he was setting up one of the back channels with was a KGB operative. Now, this doesn't prove anything about anything, but it shows that we do have a history and that holding Jared Kushner to some special standard right now does appear to be consistent with efforts to use anything possible to ding Kushner and to limit or bring down Trump. And I'm not opposed to the bring down of Donald Trump, but it's got to be done on evidence, not on speculation, innuendo, and this kind of political noise. Meanwhile, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and 3 other Arab countries have decided to break diplomatic relations with Qatar, the relatively small but wealthy and influential Persian Gulf monarchy. And we don't know all of the details here exactly about what has caused this, but in general it appears that Trump has emboldened Egypt, the Saudis, and others to put up a lot of pushback to Iran, who they are designated as the rogue of the region. But Bahrain joined Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Yemen. Who's running Yemen? I don't know how they can get involved here. At any rate, this does present a real challenge to Trump, who cozied up to the Saudis and to Egypt's military dictator al-Sisi when he visited the Middle East about 10 days ago. And this could be a surprise, or it could be something that they tipped him off to. But we'll be watching this one with interest. Qatar, of course, hosts a major American command post. That is where we run the Middle East wars from. And speaking of wars in the Middle East, I don't typically do calendar-based reporting, but this one is hard to pass up. It was 50 years ago this week that the Six-Day War was started, and Egypt was really set back by the Israeli assault. And a number of sources have published reports about the lies that Israel told to its ally, the United States, and the LBJ administration. And in particular, Mel Goodman, who I've talked with on many occasions, he's got a new book out, and I'm scheduled to interview him later this month. His new book is called Whistleblower at the CIA. And Goodman writes, as a junior analyst, I helped to draft the report about Israel's attack against Egypt on the morning of June 5th, 1967. There were sensitive communication intercepts that documented Israeli preparations for attack and no evidence of an Egyptian battle plan. So the Israelis lied and said that Egypt had started this. And Mel Goodman says that he saw the evidence that proved this wasn't true. There was a big battle inside the intelligence community where the CIA had to take on the National Security Council because the NSC had been assured by Israel and the American ambassador who was in Israel at the time that Egypt had made movements that required this response from Israel. Goodman also cites the attack by Israel on the USS Liberty, which they said was a mistake. Oh, they thought it was an Egyptian ship. And this is a controversy that has raged for all of these 50 years. And to my knowledge, Israel has never apologized for attacking the USS Liberty and the cover-up that ensued. At The Intercept, Mehdi Hassan writes about the lies that started the Six-Day War, and these were separate lies. These were lies that Israel was threatened with genocide and that they had to launch this attack as a result. But General Peled, who was the chief of the logistical command at the time, says the thesis according to which the danger of genocide hung over us in June of '67 and according to which Israel was fighting for her very physical survival was nothing but a bluff which was born and bred after the war. And even Menachem Begin later conceded that. So those lies were coupled together with claims. We now have a front-page story from Sunday's New York Times that Israel was prepared to use a crude nuclear weapon and detonate it along a mountaintop in the Sinai Peninsula as a last-ditch way of trying to warn the Arabs to back off. So the 50-day war, the 6-day war 50 years ago still has a significant legacy of deception by Israel. And in my humble opinion, Israel continues to use that tactic relentlessly in its foreign relations even today. Well, it appears this is Infrastructure Week with Trumpco at the White House. And today there was an announcement of a plan to spin off more than 30,000 federal workers into a private nonprofit corporation. These would be all the people who work for air traffic control across the nation. And in privatizing it, they want to take management of the system away from the Federal Aviation Administration, which has been the subject of critical reports on its effort to update the system under a broad program called Next Gen. But the idea that a private corporation, probably run by a crony of Donald Trump's, is going to do a better job at a lower cost is fiction. And we're going to see later this week other projects that Trump is proposing for public-private partnerships, and I encourage you to look for his cronies and the profiteering that is going to be opened up by these proposals. Now, much of this has to be passed by Congress, but you can expect the Republican majorities to go along with it, especially if it means extra campaign contributions down the line. And finally today, I saw this late on Friday, and I want to encourage you to read this review by Paul Street that's published at Counterpunch of a new book that I haven't seen yet. It's written by University of Pittsburgh law and history professor David J. Garrow, and it's called Rising Star, The Making of Barack Obama. It's over 1,000 pages long, 1,400 pages with the index. And I don't have time to go through all of the aspects here that are reviewed by Paul Street, who also has written critically of Barack Obama. But it is a real detailed takedown of the pre-presidential Obama, who we're told made a decision at age 25 that he wanted to be president of the United States. That was a new one to me. But also how many people were put off at Harvard by his sense of superiority and arrogance, how when he got elected to the state Senate in Illinois, his progressive allies found that he wasn't showing up very much. He didn't really work to pass bills that he signed on to, and that on many days he was simply unavailable playing golf or playing basketball. But it also shows that when the Reverend Wright, Jeremiah Wright, became a liability during the 2008 campaign, that Obama visited him and asked him not to speak publicly until after the election, and Reverend Wright said no. And then, apparently, engineered by Barack, but we know a close friend of his named Eric Whitaker, who was also a member of the Trinity Church, offered Wright $150,000 to zip it, to not preach at all until after the election. And to his credit, Reverend Wright refused the effort to silence him and to buy his silence. Anyway, those are just a couple of quick anecdotes, but it does appear that this is quite an encyclopedic review of the Obama presidency. And in this review of the book, there are some criticisms of omissions that Paul Street detected. But I think it's worth reading to kind of rebalance attitudes about Barack Obama, because with Trump in the White House, many people are just kind of ignoring and going amnesia on all of the things that are a part of the true history and the presidential record of Barack Obama. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. I hope to be with you tomorrow. Click in and find out. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.